most dramatic story of the season. It's Torres to give Chelsea a place in the Champions League final. The headline has been written.
Unbelievable!
Hello and welcome back to the second episode of the Football Talent Show. I'm joined as always by Jacek Kulig alongside me. We're back for another week after our first episode where we profiled Georgia. And now for the second week, we're going into our first club, FC Chelsea, and more specifically, Cobham, the fantastic academy that continues to produce talent, not only for the Chelsea first team, but I would say the entire English pyramid. Jacek, how are we doing today, and are we excited for a pretty comprehensive episode?
Hey Adam, super excited. In this episode, we will talk about Chelsea, so one of the greatest academies in the 21st century, two times UEFA Youth League winners, joint most final appearances alongside Benfica. So many great stories, so many success stories, but also sadly flop stories. So we'll have plenty to talk about with another fantastic guest.
Absolutely. We have another fantastic guest joining us for the ride. Felix Johnston, an absolute Chelsea and Cobham expert tuning in from Milan, Italy. Felix, it's great to have you here.
Yes, hello. It's a pleasure to be on the show. We're talking about Cobham, which is what I'm best known for, really, in my work. I'm excited to hopefully share some expertise, but also talk with some educated people, which you don't always get in my line of work, which is talking to a lot of random Twitter fans. It's good to talk to some slightly more well-rounded people.
Felix, the one thing we ask all of our guests is the first football match you can remember.
Yeah, so I thought about this a lot, and it was actually the thing I was most scared about coming on this show is answering that question, because for some reason I can never remember the first match I went to live at Stamford Bridge, which I know isn't the question, but initially I thought it was. And I remember the first couple times I went to Stamford Bridge because I only got to go once a season or maybe once every 2 seasons growing up. And I would always get like my heart pumping as I walked up the stairs every single time. And it's a bit embarrassing, but I was genuinely like, I would shake sometimes while watching the games because I genuinely loved it so much to go, and I never got to go. And I can never remember my first one, and it always really, really annoys me. The only one that sticks out is watching Chelsea versus Shakhtar Donetsk, and the reason why it sticks out is my first venture into scouting was seeing this Willian for Shakhtar, who I'd never heard of in my life, destroying us on the right wing, absolutely destroying us. And then I remember my dad telling me, this was however long later, like, you know, that guy, we're actually signing him. And I was so excited. But to answer the question properly, the first match I remember actually watching live, I feel like this is a bit embarrassing and showing of my age, is probably Chelsea versus Barcelona semi-final 2012. And the reason is because I remember exactly where I was in my house. My sister was grounded, and she was under the stairs, not allowed to be with everyone else. She was shoved away. And she doesn't like football. The rest of my family, apart from my dad, doesn't like football. But she was peeping through the cupboard because she was seeing how crazy the game was. And I just remember Torres going away and scoring that goal and just disbelief, absolutely disbelief. So I'll go with Chelsea Barca semi-final 2012.
That's quite amazing that you mentioned Shakhtar, because I think we will talk quite a lot about Shakhtar in this episode, because yeah, Chelsea won the first ever UEFA Youth League against Shakhtar. So yeah, and maybe I'm gonna say about my first game. Why not? If we are on it. So the first ever live game that I've watched was actually Jagiellonia Białystok, so a team from my hometown, playing against the reserves of Legia Warsaw. Reserves of Legia Warsaw. So I remember going to that game with my father, and I was so excited, and I was asking myself, will there be fans with flags and like this pyro stuff? And yeah, there were well, maybe not many fans, maybe about 300, as Jagiellonia was in the third division back then. But yeah, I still remember how my heart beats, and yeah. Adam, maybe tell about your first game, because you never mentioned that.
It was on the Betzenberg in Kaiserslautern. So a huge fan scene there for some of the non-German listeners who don't know about it. It was back in the years where Kaiserslautern was in the ascendancy more. They were in the first tier back then. They played against FC Augsburg and just an amazing fan scene. I think the fan scene is kind of always what drags you in initially. That's kind of the thing that gets you going more so than the football on the pitch. I don't know, for you, Felix, how was it, the fan scene at Chelsea back then to compare to now as someone who's been with the club for so long?
Yeah, it's interesting. The only thing that I can really compare it to is that when I used to watch my first couple games, which was like one a season, my dad would never get the tickets. So we only went once a season because we'd get tickets from one of his friends who just couldn't go to the game. And he was some like high up guy who got it through like some company, and we just were lucky to know him. And he would sit in not the corporate box section, but it was above the bench on the second tier. It's a very like posh section of Chelsea where people aren't chanting at all. Like me clapping was already enough. Like sit down, you're doing too much now. And they were hardly celebrating goals. And I'd always look over to the Matthew Harding lower, which is one of the sections behind our goal, which is where it all like goes off really. And always wishing that I could be there. Always wishing that I could be there. And then when I turned like 16, 17, and it became normal for me to be able to go to games, I sat in the Matthew Harding lower, and 2 seasons straight, I went to, I'd say, probably 60% of games. So I don't know whether the atmosphere has improved or got worse, but from where I sat when I was younger to later, it's got a lot better.
And who was your very first idol, your very first favorite Chelsea player back then?
My first favorite Chelsea player was definitely Didier Drogba, because, my first game was that 2012 semi-final, but I also remember that final very well. I literally remember like I was watching it downstairs with my uncle who never watched football, and I just remember after we won, I went upstairs to the kitchen and I just looked into the distance like I was a footballer in a really compilation on TikTok, like trying to look really cool. I just remember being like, we actually did that. We actually did that. I couldn't believe my eyes, and Drogba was the idol for me. And then once again, you're so young, you don't know much. And I remember my dad telling me again 2 weeks later that Drogba was leaving Chelsea, and I was like, huh? that's our best player. Why is he leaving now? And obviously, if you were older, you probably knew that he was already meant to leave. It was his last kick. He came back. I was at the game where we won the Premier League in his last ever game for Chelsea. He got lifted up against Sunderland, I think. But the answer I want to give to that question, because Drogba was for that first couple of weeks of memory, I need to mention him. I always want to mention him, the man who made me fall in love with football. I mean, I'm not a professional footballer, but I play and I model my game completely on him, is Eden Hazard. And I will, to the death, defend Eden Hazard. I love him. He is one of the best footballers, I think, in the history of the game. At his peak, was compared to Messi, compared to Ronaldo for a reason. He made me fall in love with football.
I couldn't agree more with Eden Hazard. Really, such an amazing player. You guys know that I love player roles, so I don't even know what player role Eden Hazard was. He was a flamboyant winger, explosive winger, inside forward. So creativity and dribbling skills. Such an amazing player, and it's really sad that his like recent history in Real Madrid, like people will mostly remember that, and they very quickly forgot how amazing he was for not even for Chelsea, but even for Lille. I still remember when he was 19, I think he scored 20 goals and had like 20 assists for Lille. So he was one of the most amazing players I have seen in the 21st century for sure.
I honestly wish that I was old enough to have watched Hazard come through and seen even the early portions of his career, because watching the clips back, I feel like if I was watching him now as someone trying to find a young talent, I would be like, get him now. He's incredible. But you mentioned what profile, what position he is. This is the thing with Hazard at Chelsea. You can't be a scout with Hazard. He was our winger, our striker, our midfielder, our defensive midfielder. He wasn't our defender because he'd never run backwards, but he'd pick the ball up anywhere on the pitch and just dribble the whole team. And I watched Hazard growing up. I didn't need statistics, but I think I saw a statistic recently that he was averaging over 6 dribbles per 90, I think, in his time in the Premier League. And I think it was 88% or above 80% success rate on his dribbles, which if you saw that now, to me, I would lose my mind as someone who analyzes more now. And I think he's such an interesting case study in football because you can so easily say, it's so sad to see what happened at Madrid. If he just worked a bit harder, if he'd done this and that. But you can also say that he wouldn't have become half the player he was if he did that early in his career. And maybe he needed to just enjoy football and not try 100% in training. Watch any podcast with any ex-Chelsea player. They all spoke about how he turned up to training with his laces undone, etc. And it looks really lazy, but it's what allowed him to enjoy himself on the pitch and bring the best part of his football. And the stages in his career, which was short, but there was the 15-16 season where he wasn't so good. He wasn't enjoying his football. That's what it was. So people say it's sad what happened at Madrid, but people blame him a lot of the time. Should he have put on all that weight? No, he shouldn't have. He probably should have conditioned himself a bit better. But he is someone who plays for the love of football. And I don't think you can say that he should have worked a bit hard and he should have done this. I don't think he would have been the same player. I think he just needed to enjoy himself.
It's a spectacular player, one that's probably defining for Chelsea's modern history. I would say there's no player kind of in the post-John Terry era who defines Chelsea more than Eden Hazard throughout the Conte years, for example. A brilliant player, and I think one of many who we'll get onto in this episode. Going to move us swiftly into the real key points for this episode, which is the academy, right? We can talk all day about some of the big greats in Chelsea's history, like Drogba, like Hazard, but this focus today will be all about the academy. And a good place to start is going back a little bit to some of the greatest academy teams in the recent past. We can go really far back to the beginning of the 2000s with the likes of Ryan Bertrand coming through, some really high level quality players. But I think a good place to start is 2014, when we saw the beginning of Chelsea's real dominance in the UEFA Youth League. In 2014, of course, they made it to the final, and they even went out and beat Shakhtar Donetsk, one of Felix's favorite oppositions, I guess, for Chelsea in the final as well. Talk me through a little bit about that team and how that kind of laid the groundwork for what Cobham means today as one of the greatest youth academies in Europe.
Yeah, well, firstly, I wouldn't say Shakhtar Donetsk is one of my favorite teams because they made us pay 62 million for Mudryk. So, it's a love-hate relationship, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah, I mean, these UEFA Youth League campaigns, as I said, I'm a younger fan, right? I'm 19, so I didn't really watch these teams very comprehensively. But it also gives me a different perspective because I started watching the academy basically religiously from 2020. I watched a bit from 2019, but religiously almost every game that's televised from 2020. And we've been in the youth league, I think, in 2 of the seasons that I've watched. And I look at this now, 4 finals in 5 years, 2 wins. It's absolutely unbelievable. And I only realize it now because if we did that now, I would be shocked. I'd be beyond shocked. And I get the same thing with I know we're not talking about it, but the FA Youth Cup. Chelsea won so many FA Youth Cups in the 2010s. And now I watch us now with incredibly talented players that I think can make it to the top. And players like Levi Colwill, Livramento have already made it through. And they played in those competitions and they struggled. And it's a knockout competition. So it shows the quality. And I look through the squads that I have in front of me for these games, and I don't think it can be understated how crazy it is that I know I'm a Chelsea fan, but I can name every single player in that team. And I don't test me, but I think I can name what club they're at as well. I know a lot of these players. I've followed them throughout their career, but I think most people can name. I'm looking at this first one in 2014. I mean, Dominic Solanke, Jeremy Boga, Charly Musonda, Loftus-Cheek, Charlie Colkett, maybe not so much, but Ola Aina, Christensen, Clark Salter, and then Collins is I think is a Barnsley or Bradford, something like that. That is an insane collection of players to have. I think this is a great example of not only is Cobham such a good academy for pure talent, people have made it through to the Chelsea first team, but Cobham has supplied so much of the football world. You look around, teams are drenched in Cobham players, supplying the English Football League, supplying European leagues. And I think these early UEFA Youth League teams are good examples of that.
Yeah, and you forgot to mention one very important name, in my opinion. So probably back then, my second favorite player from this team after Charly Musonda, Izzy Brown. And it's such a sad story that Izzy Brown, really, he had all the talent in the world. He was one of the in my opinion, one of the biggest under 17 talents back then, around 2013. and he retired. He retired at the age of, I think, 26 from football. He doesn't play football anymore, so it's such a sad story, but the talent was huge. And just to show the quality of this team, for example, Fikayo Tomori didn't even play a single minute in this final. And okay, you can like or not like Fikayo Tomori, but he's having a really good career. He plays for AC Milan, and he didn't even get a single minute in this game. So crazy talented team, some great stories, some decent stories, but yeah, the potential was immense.
Yeah, I specifically looked at the front four and then what's also on the bench in those positions. Of course, I have Brown, but then also Musonda Jr., almost your kind of forgotten talents forming that axis there. Charly Musonda Jr. was, for me, one of my favorite young players. We had an assignment in school, which was basically to research a person, a figure in history or a current person. And people did Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King, and I did Charly Musonda Jr. That was my historical figure of significance. And yeah, that one obviously didn't pan out to the same extent as a Martin Luther King, but I had really high hopes for him. And I would say Musonda, at least for me, kind of paved the way for my scouting career and my analysis career. So I'll be thankful for him always for that. And I'm also really interested in, yeah, I mean, a youth team with Solanke and Tammy Abraham together is just, for me, mind-boggling to have that much quality competing for a position. I imagine those two really had a big part in developing each other's game and turning themselves into the number nines that they are today.
It's funny that you mentioned your task at school because like probably 15 years earlier, I had the same task and I decided to go with Nwankwo Kanu. Yeah, so I still remember, and I got an A for that. I was speaking about Nwankwo Kanu for like 40 minutes. So yeah, and about this team, yeah, Charly Musonda, such an important name, crazy talented player coming from a football family. His father was a football player, his brothers as well. And I still remember when he was loaned to, I think, Levante in Spain. And I saw one of his games, and he was already like 21. And I was asking myself, what the hell is going on with this player? Why is he at Levante? Why isn't he at, I don't know, Real Madrid or Barcelona at this point? And I remember he had such a great game, and I said, oh my gosh, he's so back. Totally so back. But sadly, yeah, it never really worked out, and it's such a shame.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Musonda's story is the story of so many talents at Cobham, and any talent, of course. It does, it's not just Cobham, but I do feel like there is a bit of a correlation of Cobham and injuries. I mean, Charlie Musonda's career, just injuries, 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 injuries. It was so sad to see. Like, I mean, I may have not watched the youth teams as much back in the day, but Charlie Musonda broke through. He was playing games under Conte. He was playing small games. He was, Belgian. He was the next Hazard, and he was looking good in games. And I remember the preseason. I remember he'd been completely forgotten, and then he was out for 2 years. And I just remember like one day, just like, of course we still have Charlie Musonda. I looked at his Instagram, and he hadn't posted for like a year. It was blacked out, and then there was a preseason coming under Thomas Tuchel just after we won the Champions League 2021, and he was promoting so much. It was the Instagram reels, the working hard in Dubai, coming back. I was like, wow, wait, he's gonna come straight into the first team. He looks so good, and I don't think he didn't play a minute. He left. He went to some club in the Spanish second tier, I think. Didn't work out. Went to another club, and now I think is a free agent, as we know. So he was hit with, I think, 2 years worth of injuries, and it's so sad to see how much it affected him, and just clearly affected his game. And it's just a big story with a lot of the common talents. Some have still made it through. Loftus Cheek, loads of injuries, and still has gone on to have a fantastic career. But some of them, they never really get past the injury stage.
Yeah, I mean, Musonda, 27 years old now, last played in the Cypriot first tier, is a free agent now. It's pretty much not the career anybody expected from a talent of that level that he had. And I really like that you mentioned also kind of the injury aspect being synonymous with Chelsea Football Club, because that's actually something I wanted to mention a little bit later on in the show. But from my perception from the outside, I watched a few games, obviously, as we did some research on some of the current gems in the academy. I watched a match between Chelsea and Reading. And one of the things that really strikes you is the difference in physical development. I mean, Chelsea have a U19 team that is even younger than a lot of the players on Reading, but they're so physically mature at these young ages. You see that Chelsea really puts a lot of weight on physical development, players who are maybe above their genetic grade. And I think that has obviously advantages in having players who are really ready for senior football right away, like we saw with a guy like Fikayo Tomori breaking through, like we see with a guy like Robin Loftus-Cheek when he broke through. They're players that are really, when they're fit, physically made for senior football. But as you say, I think these body types also come with really high injury risks. And I do think that's something that could be correlated to how Chelsea goes about their early fitness regimens and their early gym regimens at such young ages.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I feel like of recent watching of the academy, I feel like I haven't seen too many injuries, but a lot of the time you don't see these injuries in the academy and you see it as they come through. The reality is that these players play a lot of games, a lot of games. They go international football as well. They want to prove themselves. That's what young players want to do. They want to play every minute so they can prove themselves. And sometimes they run themselves into the ground. I mean, it's definitely true, the physical aspect. And I think Chelsea have probably put quite a big onus on that recently, is getting players physically ready earlier. There's a lot of like titans in our team that are really big, but then you have players like Kiano Dyer, who we'll talk about later, who's much more lightweight and much smaller. So injuries are always so hard to talk about because I feel like I always say in football, I often have opinions, but sometimes you need to say I don't know. And injuries is not just about Cobham, but Chelsea in general. Always something you can never say 100% about. You can blame Pochettino for the injuries last season, running players into the ground, but you don't know if that was the case. You know, we have injury-prone players. That's how it works. So I can't talk on it too much. There have been injuries. Travis Akomia, Billy G had year-long injuries. Leo Cardozo was out for the best part of 2 years as well. So there have been injuries, but they're young players. They're young players that are growing while they play. A lot of people forget that. You know, you could be seeing a player now, and in a year they'll be 3 inches taller, and they could be getting used to their body. So it's all about adjusting, really.
Yeah, fully agree. Let's not forget that clubs have the best like doctors, and they still didn't find a solution for injuries. For example, in my opinion, the biggest talents that I have ever seen in football, so Ronaldo Fenomeno, he didn't have knees honestly to play football. So he was just unlucky. Or for example, if you look at Abu Dhabi, come on, this guy was a physical monster, and injuries destroyed him. So it's all about luck in life and in football.
Yeah, 100%. Let's then move on to the following year, where Chelsea are once again in the Youth League final and once again winning the final. Just some standouts for me in the squad. So Tamori and Abraham both on the bench the year before, now in the starting lineup. Tamori even on the score sheet against PSG in the final, where they won 2-1. Also interesting to mention, number 10, Palmer, playing for Chelsea. Not Cole Palmer, but Casey Palmer, another perhaps forgotten talent, had 5 goals in that tournament. Was the top scorer in the UEFA Youth League that year. Maybe Jacek, you can speak a little bit about Casey Palmer's development, and then Felix take it over with some of the other talents who stood out for you in this squad.
Yeah, so Casey Palmer was obviously one of the biggest talents in England back then. Sadly, yeah, he never really reached the highest level. Still had a decent career. The one talent that I would like to mention was Mukhtar Ali. He was considered a genius back then. I never really shared that opinion. I never thought he was that good. But yeah, there was a lot of hype around him. We also had yeah, Ola Aina having a really really solid career. Dudron Sterling, so one of the right backs that Cobham produced in recent years. It's really crazy how many good right backs Cobham had through the years. Such an impressive team, and let's not forget that there was a Chelsea player who played against Chelsea that day. So Christopher Nkunku, he was also a great talent. I'm just looking at this PSG squad, and I think there were many many more flops on the PSG side than on the Chelsea side.
Jean-Philippe Augustin up top, a good example. We're talking about players riddled by injuries. Doucouré at center back for PSG spent basically 4 years at Gladbach only on the treatment table. One of the saddest cases, I would say, of a player riddled by injuries. And basically coming in second place for riddled by injuries is Dan Atso on the bench as well. Another player I'm a huge, huge fan of who sadly had so many injuries in his career. there's always interesting to look at these squads, also at the younger players on the bench who are basically coming into their own, not yet in the starting lineups, but as the younger players almost learning from those ahead of them. We obviously said the years before with Abraham and Tomori, and this time around we have a guy like Trevor Chalobah at center back, and also coming on as a second half substitute in this match was Mason Mount. Talk to me a little bit about Mason Mount's presence in Cobham, and also what it meant for the fan base to see him leave to a direct rival like United.
Yeah, I will speak on that. If you don't mind, I want to just quickly speak on that back line because I don't think it should be forgotten about. That back line is pretty ridiculous. I mean, Ola Aina, Jake Clark-Salter, Fikayo Tomori, and Dujon Sterling are four really, really good players. Tomori speaks for himself. Ola Aina, for me, like, I don't like when people talk about underrated and they talk about Kai Havertz. This is underrated, Ola Aina. For me, one of the most underrated players in the Premier League. So technically secure, one-on-one defending, one of the best that I've seen. There's two things that you won't see someone leaving Cobham without being able to do. For any player, weak foot. Okay, if we're talking FIFA, no one's leaving Cobham without at least a 4-star weak foot. Okay, they're happy to use it. A friend of mine had a friend who went on trial at Chelsea, and apparently 90% of what he did there was just do training sessions on his weak foot because it wasn't good enough. And that's all they did. And the second thing to highlight in this back line is 1v1 defending. There are so many good 1v1 defenders out of Cobham. You have Reece James, Tino Livramento, you have Josh Acheampong, who we'll talk about. Incredible. You have Dujon Sterling, probably underrated, but he's one of my favorite players because I watched him throughout his loan journey. And Ola Aina, 1v1 defending is exceptional. And so I just wanted to shout out that back line because I think it's incredible the supply there. You talk about PSG's team, how a lot of them didn't make it through. I'm sure that some of them have good careers and I don't know them, but a lot of these players are supplying the EFL and other teams constantly, and it's very impressive. But to answer your actual question, sorry for going around, Mason Mount, I mean, one of the most awkward conversations ever, and I'm so happy I can talk about it on this podcast because you guys aren't Chelsea fans. And if I bring up Mason Mount in front of any Chelsea fan, the pitchforks come out and I'm getting, killed for even mentioning his name. Mason Mount was the poster boy for Cobham. He was the absolute poster boy. He went to Vitesse. He went to Derby under Frank Lampard. Okay, meant to be the next Frank Lampard. Not the exact same type of player, but, midfielder who likes to score goals. It's easy to say it. He was Lampard's son. We had a transfer ban. We were all over the place. We had no idea what was going to happen. And Mason Mount comes through and he is working so hard off the ball, winning the ball back, scoring goals, scoring in his first home game versus Leicester, stealing the ball of Wilfred Ndidi straight into the bottom corner. See, this is how much I remember it. Like that year, that's what probably has my such love for Cobham is that year with Frank Lampard. I saw all these talents and I was like, that's what football's about for me. I love seeing these young players come through with that connection, and Mason Mount was a staple of that. Even Reece James was my favorite player. I always preferred him to all the players. I just, he's so humble. He doesn't talk much. I always just liked him. But Mason Mount, if there was a poster boy, it was Mason Mount. And the way his career has gone is really sad. It's hard to talk about because he was so instrumental for us. He won back-to-back Player of the Years. He was exceptional in that Champions League run under Thomas Tuchel. He scored against Real Madrid to send us to the final. So if you're talking about Mason Mount at Chelsea, I loved him. But ever since 2022, and this is before he left Chelsea, ever since the Club World Cup, early 2022, he started falling off. And not that it's relevant, but so did Thomas Tuchel. I don't think Thomas Tuchel should have got sacked, but I think people underestimate how poor we were in 2022, and that coincided with Mason Mount. I don't know how he won that second Player of the Year award. Thiago Silva, for me, was light years ahead of Mason Mount that year. He had a lot of fan love. As I said, he was the poster boy, but also a reason why a lot of people don't like him. Okay, he was loved to the point where sometimes he couldn't get criticized. And then, aside from that, 2022, I thought he fell off a bit, but he was still good. 2023-24, that season, 2022-23, sorry, Graham Potter, that season, that's where everything kind of just went wrong for Mason Mount. He was a player that never got injured, never, ever got injured. I implore anyone watching this podcast to look up Mason Mount Coquelin injury, okay? It was 2020, I think, under Lampard. We played Valencia, if I'm not wrong, and Coquelin went absolutely through Mason Mount. And it's one of those ankle injuries where you get the photo and his ankle is literally at like a 5-degree angle. It's been bent so badly. And Mount came off and we were like, oh my God, he actually got injured. We thought he was made of rubber. Next game he's back. He's back immediately. And that's what he did. But suddenly everything changed. And we talk about injuries for Cobham. Mason Mount, what happened to him? He literally is made of glass for a player who previously could never get injured. And what happened that season? He got worse and worse, wasn't playing, has scored 1 goal in about 2 years. And at the end of it, you know what? I'm happy he went. Not just because clearly his career's gone downhill, but it wasn't worth the politics, the infighting for Chelsea fans. And even though I always liked Mason Mount, as I said, I preferred Reece James. And I'm not just saying this because his career's gone downhill. I always never minded us losing him. I genuinely didn't. I didn't think he was this elite player. I knew there were better players out there. I wanted us to keep him on a fair wage because I thought he contributed to the squad and was very important and could have found good form. But I don't think he is an elite player. I don't. Seeing him go was sad. It pulled on the heartstrings, but it was a good time because the infighting at Chelsea was too much. And I think he'd been on the decline for about a year and a half.
Jacek, your opinion on Mason Mount as someone who's a bit more of a external observer, as Felix said, doesn't necessarily have the heart connection to Mason Mount. What was it like following his career and also where he is right now?
Absolutely loved him at the under 17, under 19 level. I still remember doing a report on him and giving him 9 out of 10. And many Chelsea fans came to me and said, "Man, you're crazy. He's generational. He's an absolute 10 out of 10." Even though I loved him, I didn't really think he will be an elite player. But yeah, it's so sad to see what's happening with him now. I think he deserves more. He deserves more, and he's a much better player than 90% of people think of him now. I really hope he will bounce back, but yeah, he will never become a player that many people thought a few years ago. And yeah,
The thing is, I don't hope he comes back because obviously he plays for Manchester United. But from a personable aspect, I do because every player deserves a career, but he's a good guy and he works really hard, and I don't. He really doesn't deserve what's happened to him. And even though I understand United fans will get angry about injuries, I understand it. It does hurt me when I see them attacking him for getting injured, and I'm like, I don't think any player deserves to get attacked for injuries, but I can promise you, having seen Mason Mount at Chelsea, he is doing everything, absolutely everything to be fit. And one more thing I want to say before I pass it on, and this is just kind of an open debate. One interesting thing with Mason Mount, we talked about injuries. His build has changed a lot. It's really changed. He came in as a slender player, not like weaving in and out like Hazard, but he was slender and allowed him to be a bit more elastic, a bit more rubbery. And when he got hit, he could deal with it. And it was around 2022. I don't know why he decided to bulk up. And I remember him posting on Instagram a picture of him like flexing. And at the time, I probably thought, oh, cool, he's bulking up. That can only be positive. I can't say it's the reason, but it's interesting that now he comes on. Not only does he get more injuries, carrying more weight, but he looks a lot less mobile than he did before. He wasn't a weaving in and out player, but he was a bouncy player. He'd get about because he was very good out of possession as well. Now he looks a lot more robust. I'm not sure it really fits his game.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. It reminds me of one of the players I wrote for on Football Talent Scout, Ibrahim Maza. I think it's one of his best traits currently, that ability to basically ride challenges and stay balanced, stay fluid, right? He doesn't need to necessarily bounce the other player off, but he needs to basically be able to take that hit and then stay on his feet. And that's something he has even with a slender frame. And I think that's really important in Maza's case, but also with so many attacking midfielders in world football, that they retain that kind of really languid, fluid agility to be able to kind of roam around in nimble ways that pretty much every other player on the pitch can't do. It's kind of taking away that X factor by becoming just like everybody else.
that's very true. For example, the biggest English under 17 talent right now, in my opinion, Max Doman. I'm really afraid that he will suffer from that. He's reaching almost 180 centimeters, and I really hope that he won't go too big. He won't bulk up because he will lose all this flair and agility that makes him so special. And what you said, Felix, about Mason Mount, yeah, he was a lightweight player during his youth, and yeah, a lot of flair, good dribbler. But right now, he doesn't look at all like this kind of players. He looks more like a typical box-to-box powerful runner rather than advanced playmaker.
Yeah, definitely. And the build thing is very interesting because once you said Max Dowman, I thought about him. I thought about another Arsenal talent, Ethan Nwaneri, who I would say, interestingly, you say you don't want Max Dowman to bulk up too much, and I genuinely agree. But looking at Ethan Nwaneri, he almost has a natural physical build to him. He's not big, but he has a lot more robustness in his upper body. He does, and he can ride challenges a bit more. He not maintained, he has, but also maintained an incredible agility, balance, weaving in and out of challenges. So it's interesting the disparity of someone who, from whenever I've seen him, I'm not an Arsenal fan, so I don't watch every game, but mainly for England, a guy who's always had that build, quite a strong upper body, but is such a weaving in and out of player. But then you mentioned Mason Mount, you mentioned Max Dowman, and it's hard to project, but I do still agree with you that if Max Dowman bulks up, you don't want him to lose his game. So it's interesting, two different players there, but one of them will be changing their body, the other one kind of came in with it.
100%. It feels a little bit like a nature versus nurture debate.
Yep.
If you have it, then keep it. But if you don't have it, then maybe stick to your strengths. I think we could talk about that all day. But let's move on a little bit here, going a few years forward to Chelsea's next UEFA Youth League final appearance. After 2 wins, they felt bitter defeat for the first time in a 3-0 defeat to Barcelona. Some of the Barcelona players on the day, there's some good ones. Ricky Puig, of course, a really, really interesting player who has had a career which I think very few expected to go exactly the direction it went. Guys like Mateo Moret, Abel Ruiz, also some interesting talents. But we're here to talk about Chelsea, and the one who immediately stands out to me is Callum Hudson-Odoi. We talked about Mason Mount as a poster boy for Cobham. For me, Callum Hudson-Odoi is just as much that poster boy, if not even more, for how his career transpired at Chelsea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at this team, the closer we get to now, I'm noticing so many players that I really know the career of. Callum Hudson-Odoi was the original star boy. That's what everyone calls him at Chelsea. He was the no one broke through. It was the biggest block to get into the first team. Like, you just won't. You can't do it. But Hudson-Odoi came through, and because of that block, you didn't have to watch the youth team. If someone made it through, they must be good. They must be really good. And I remember him, Europa League nights, even in the Premier League, the fearlessness of him dribbling at players. It was incredible. I see a lot of players now. Tyrique George is breaking through at Chelsea. He's a left winger. And I really, really rate Tyrique George. But Tyrique George, has been coming on at right wing quite a few games for Chelsea. And he's done well, to be fair to him. Like he's not shied away. He's still like dribbling at players, but he's going round players a lot more. This was the thing with Hudson-Odoi. He was a left winger, but he would come on at right wing and it didn't matter. And he would take on players every single day of the week, go around the outside, deliver it to Morata, who would usually miss, but he scored a couple. This is funny to say, but we talk about Hazard as my favorite ever Chelsea player. Emotional connection. Hudson-Odoi could honestly be second. I do not support a player more in the world, individually a player, than Hudson-Odoi. I want him to prosper so much because that Achilles injury was one of the most unfortunate things ever. And I actually have a personal thing with Hudson-Odoi, which is quite funny. Chelsea versus Watford, last game of the 2018-19 season, before the Europa League final against Arsenal. We played Watford, and I was sitting with my mate in one of the stands. I think it was East Lower. And we thought, it's the end of the game. They're doing their lap around the pitch because it's the last game of the season. So I thought, let's get to like behind the bench because the players will go through the tunnel and I can say hi to them. And Hudson-Odoi was on his crutches walking down. And I shouted either, "We love you, Callum," or something, or like, "You're star boy." And he looks over to me and was like, "I appreciate that," or something. And that means nothing. I know, like, if that happened now, like, cool. But to me, honestly, like, he was the star boy. And we talked about my first live game. My first academy game, I went only because of Hudson-Odoi. So it was the 2019-20 season, I think it was he was injured basically. He was coming back from his injury. I was at school and it was a Friday, and I was talking to my mates and I was like, should we do something? Or I don't know, should we do something tonight? And then I just saw on Instagram Chelsea are playing Brighton at Stamford Bridge in under 21s, and Hudson-Odoi is playing his first game back, making his way back in academy football. And my mates were all Chelsea fans. We were like, we have to go if Hudson-Odoi is playing. So that was my first academy game ever, purely there to watch Hudson-Odoi after his Achilles injury. So I'll stop rambling. But basically, I love him. I absolutely love Hudson-Odoi.
And what you said, Felix, about him playing on the right, I still remember that he played very often centrally for England under 17s. So there was Jadon Sancho on the left, Callum as an attacking midfielder, and on the right, Phil Foden. So his versatility is underrated, I would say, because people right now would probably think that, yeah, he's only a winger. But yeah, such a fantastic player. I still remember. I was almost 100% sure. You can never be sure in football, honestly. Even Lamine Yamal, maybe he will get injured. But yeah, I was 99% sure about Callum Hudson-Odoi becoming a top 10 Ballon d'Or player. And I still remember the links with Bayern Munich. And yeah, people were asking me, man, should Bayern go for him? And I'm saying, definitely. He's a top talent, one of the biggest talent in world football. So such a great player. And I must say that, yeah, if I watch Nottingham these days, I watch it mostly for Callum as well.
I still think that he is. I said Ole Aina. I also think Hudson-Odoi is one of the most underrated players in the Premier League, and I really pride myself on not being biased. I really try and be as objective as possible in football, but I always say if there's one player I'm going to be biased for, it's Hudson-Odoi. So if I'm being over the top, you can tell me, but I really think that he's extremely underrated because he's such a direct threat. He can go outside, he can go inside. People said 3 goals in 3 years for Hudson-Odoi. That was the moniker for Hudson-Odoi at Chelsea towards the end when people got fed up with him. He'd scored 3 goals in 3 years in the Premier League. But he can score goals. I mean, he has his trademark shot now going round the keeper. And also, what's very underrated is his crossing. I don't think you can be an elite winger without having the ability to cut back inside slightly and cross it into the back post. That's the Michael Olise, the Lamine Yamal. A lot of wingers can't do it. Noni Madueke, for example. I like him. He's a certain profile, and I think he's a useful addition to our squad. But if you sell him next summer, I don't mind it because you can get better than Noni Madueke. Hudson-Odoi is a really complete winger, extremely direct, and scores more goals than people think. I mean, if I'm Spurs, I'd be looking at Hudson-Odoi because they need a good winger to come in, and I think he fits the profile very well.
I think another player who you also briefly mentioned earlier in the recording, who's also a big member of this 2018 squad, is Reece James. You said earlier you're a big fan of his. Let's talk a little bit about Reece James.
I love Reece James so much, and we talk about Mason Mount, we talk about Hudson-Odoi with his injuries, another player that I feel so bad for. And even though I love him so much in recent years, well, in the last year, I haven't lost my affection for Reece James. When he comes back, I'm so excited, but I, hand on heart, do not get excited anymore for Reece James. I don't get excited for the report that Reece James is back in training because so that I can't get too emotionally hurt. I don't think of him as a Chelsea player anymore. I don't build teams of Reece James anymore. I just think of Malo Gusto. Reece James is a cherry on top. He's just a very, very nice addition to have, but you cannot count on him being there. But as a player, he's exceptional. For me, the best right back in the world when he's fit. And I will say that. I'm not trying to have a big debate here about versus Trent Alexander-Arnold, whatever. It depends on what kind of team you have. If Trent's more useful to your team with his creativity, sure. But the blend of attacking and defensive attributes is ridiculous. He is one of the best one-on-one defenders in the world. Vinicius Jr., Rafael Leao, Sadio Mane, they all name him as one of the best they've come up against. Physicality, exceptional. So strong. We talk about build. There's a debate about whether he's put on too much muscle, but at least at a certain point, he had a good balance between the physicality and the agility. He's played in midfield. He can pick up the ball in any position. He can overlap. He can underlap. He's incredible. And he's our captain as well, which is really nice to see. But equally, he's not a very vocal captain, which is interesting about him.
People are obsessed these days about saying, yeah, this guy is the best. I would say 2, 3 years ago, Reece James was the most complete fullback in world football, definitely. So he could play as a right back. He was a great option to play as a center back as well, because he's a great defender. I even remember when Real Madrid's fans were asking me, who should they sign as a right back? I said Reece James. It's a no-brainer. If you want to go big on a right back, just go for Reece James. And yeah, I remember this debate back then, Trent versus Reece James. But yeah, when he's fully fit, one of the most complete right backs in world football. But yeah, you also mentioned Malo Gusto, and Malo Gusto, let's be honest, probably the biggest or one of the biggest right back talents in world football right now, and maybe top 3 players of Chelsea this season, I would say. Would you agree with that, Felix?
I wouldn't agree because of his last game, and the last game always sticks in your head, and he had a very, very poor last game. But to be fair to him, he's being asked to invert into midfield, and that's a completely new role for him. He did play midfield growing up, I know, for Lyon, but it's a big difference for him. And personally, stylistically, I think he's a player that will take big adaptations inverting into midfield because he's a very pacey, get the ball and dribble up the pitch, and he can do it in tight spaces, which is why he's been pretty good this season. But there'll be times when a team's really pressing him that he's going to have to adjust a lot because you can't always just dribble out of your way in midfield, especially when he's such a direct dribbler. He's not going to be like an Iniesta, weaving, like dropping deep. So he's going to take an adaptation, but he's been very good. I mean, top 3 Chelsea players, I go Cole Palmer, easy. Levi Colwill, maybe even above Cole Palmer for me. Absolutely exceptional. And I hope we can talk about him later because he's incredible. And either I'd say Moises Caicedo and this is a bit of humble pie for me on this one because I've been a bit harsh on him and I still don't like him stylistically. I still won't give him too much praise because I think eventually he will have problems. But Marc Cucurella has been probably our 3rd best player this season. He's been very, very good.
Yeah, Sid, I know you've been quite high on Cucurella. I think that was kind of your vindication throughout the Euros that Cucurella had a good performance.
Yeah, maybe not the biggest fan, but I was always defending Korea and yeah, because you know how fast react these days. Like they slander players very easily. So I was defending Korea and yeah, he's not as bad as many people were saying last year or 2 years ago. I think he's a very very solid left back, and in the market where left backs we don't really have many world class left backs. So yeah, Korea is a very useful player.
I think the point about useful players is also really important with Reece James because we see a lot of these specialist fullbacks nowadays. You look at guys like Alphonso Davies, super vertical player, speedster, but can only play really in certain systems that play to his strengths. On the other side, a guy like Jeremy Frimpong, another great example. He's a super player, but really, really system player. You have to play him in a back three. You have to give him attacking freedoms. And that's where Reece James is so good for these top level teams because you can pair him with any type of fullback on the other side and he can adapt his game to basically counterbalance what the other side's giving. And that's something that not a lot of players have. Before we go too far into this topic, I do want to keep us moving along to our final Youth League squad of the episode 2019. We're getting some current players who haven't even fully broken through yet from this team. I looked at a guy like Ian Maatsen, now at Aston Villa, a player kind of on the cusp of reaching his potential, but still with quite limited minutes in first team football. And then I would say 2 players who stand out to me as symbols of Cobham in midfield, Billy Gilmour and Connor Gallagher.
Yeah, the team is full of talent. I think we didn't mention Mark Gurhey. He was in the last team as well. Very, very talented player. Excellent in our academy. Went to Swansea and was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. I wish he could have stayed at Chelsea. We sold him for 30 million. I almost cried. I really wanted him to get his chance, but Chalobah got his chance instead. So it's fine. Ian Maatsen. He was Charlton Athletic, Coventry, and Burnley. He did his years in the loan department when he was probably good enough to move ahead. That Coventry loan probably didn't need it. Probably could have gone straight to a team like Burnley. And then he goes off to Dortmund as well. I don't think he's an elite player, but equally, I'll never forgive Pochettino for playing him as an attacking midfielder every single time he came on the pitch. That really did my head in last season. And thankfully, he left, went to Dortmund, and got his chance and flourished as he should. An incredibly technically gifted fullback who fits the exact modern game. Again, growing up as a midfielder back in his academy days. I forget which club he was at. But then moving on to the midfield, Connor Gallagher, Billy Gilmour. Again, you have the whole Chelsea fans debate. Firstly, I'll talk about Billy Gilmour in the same way I talk about Hudson-Odoi. Talk about breaking onto the scene. Billy Gilmour, wow. Okay, I remember it so vividly. Just before COVID, the 2 games before COVID, Chelsea-Liverpool, Chelsea-Everton. Liverpool in that year were unstoppable. There are not many games I've been so scared coming up against Liverpool. The only game I can compare it to was Chelsea versus Bayern Munich in the year Bayern won the Champions League in that COVID season. And rightly so, we got absolutely destroyed by Bayern Munich. It was one of the worst games I've ever seen in my life. But that Liverpool game scared me so much. And Billy Gilmour started that game and he absolutely schooled Fabinho. He took him back to his childhood. He absolutely destroyed him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing on the pitch. I'd seen him a bit for the academy, but wow. I mean, he was so small, but so springy and so easily moved and jinked in and out. So good on the ball, playing first time passes. He was like everything Jorginho was meant to be, but he actually moved at quicker than 0.25 speed. That's what it was for me at the beginning. And then he started that Everton game, got the trust from Frank Lampard. Tino Andrin actually made his debut in that game, obviously on the bench in this game. Same with Armando Broja. And yeah, he was absolutely exceptional in that game too. What happened from then was a bit sad. And it's a debate that I think we're going to have later in the show. And it's a debate you always have to have in academy football is size. And you can never say it. I won't mention the name, but there's a player we'll talk about, obviously, who is very similar, you could say, to Billy Gilmour, and it's really hard to project what's going to happen to him. At the end of the day, I think Billy Gilmour can be a top-level player. I think he can be, and let's put full respect on him. He's played for Chelsea, he's played for Brighton, a very good club in the Premier League, and he's just moved to Napoli. Okay, so let's not pretend he's not having a really good career, but I think he can go even higher, and I think he can be a regular starter for those clubs. It's just about having him in the right system, having the right kind of profile of player next to him to maybe help him with his deficiencies. But incredibly talented player. And quickly, I'll just say on Connor Gallagher, incredibly divisive player. Chelsea fans really refuse to give Connor Gallagher any credit. I know Jacek. Well, Jacek, you can tell us if you're enjoying him at Atletico, but he seems to be doing well. It was a match made in heaven with Simeone. Is very useful off the ball and a very functional player. But I do think that an elite team probably doesn't have Connor Gallagher. But it's hard to say because elite can be defined in many different ways. You have elite Manchester City and elite Real Madrid. Okay. And some people have even likened Connor Gallagher to Fede Valverde for Real Madrid. I'm not saying they're the exact same player, but maybe they give a certain role of running the hard yards, doing stuff that maybe the more luxury players don't want to do. But then I think about Manchester City. You're playing like Manchester City want to do, like Chelsea are trying to emulate. I don't see Connor Gallagher as a player who's going to sit in the pockets and be playing like Cole Palmer does, playing like Bernardo Silva, De Bruyne. So I think a player that loves Chelsea and I will always love, and I'm happy he didn't go to a rival club and Chelsea fans should appreciate him. But a player that I, again, don't think is quite the elite level, and I think we got a good amount of money for.
I see a lot of parallels between Leon Goretzka and Connor Gallagher. I think they're in very, very similar positions. And whereas the one left and is now flourishing at Atletico with regular game time in a more constricted in-possession system, the other's still at Bayern. And I think is tarnishing his legacy and his future because of it. So yeah, it's a really, really good example of players that may not necessarily have the technical attributes to fit into what a team needs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have the quality to play at the same level.
Yeah, and as you said, Felix, it's a perfect match, Simeone and Gallagher. The first game of Gallagher, I would say he is the top 3 player for Atletico this season so far. But yeah, the problem is Simeone plays him like much higher up the pitch, and Conor Gallagher is not the most creative asset. And I think Solo think that he is, and he's not. So yeah, it's gonna be a problem. But yeah, of course, Atletico is such a weird team. It's not a normal team. I always say Atletico is not a normal football team. Let's be honest. And just coming back to Billy Gilmour, I often use the sentence like for a Polish player who's technical and creative, I say, yeah, he's such a non-Polish player. And I think about Billy Gilmour, we can say he's one of the most non-British academy players in the last decade. So he had such a Spanish play style, so tiny, really creative, technical, breaking tight spaces. So I'm a big fan, and actually I like his move to Napoli. And Billy Gilmour will be one of the main reasons that I will watch Napoli this season.
It's interesting you mentioned Spanish because whenever I watch Billy Gilmour, I always likened him a bit to Thiago Alcantara. That's what I thought was quite a similar player, small, nifty, got the ball around. Obviously, it's hard to profile players. I just wanted to say quickly on Gallagher, he is a really interesting player profile-wise because he went to Charlton, Swansea, Crystal Palace on loan. Again, one of those players that was on loan while I was very heavily reporting on them. And he played mostly as a number 10 for them. Now, it's interesting because at Palace, he played as a number 8, the right centre mid in a 4-3-3, but constantly on the edge of the box and thought of as a number 10. He was scoring so many goals, especially in that first half of the season, which is what got Chelsea fans excited. And then he came into the squad for Chelsea, and Thomas Tuchel did a press conference, and I'll never forget, he said, I see him as a very similar profile to N'Golo Kante. And the Chelsea fans erupted. They absolutely erupted. They were like, what? What is he talking about? Completely wrong. And then he brought him in and he played him as a defensive midfielder, which a lot of people think Kante is a defensive midfielder. It's hard to, say exactly what he is. He's kind of a secondary defensive midfielder, is what I call him, because he's kind of a number 8, but you don't want him in the box, but you also don't want him to receive first off the line. The whole Maurizio Sarri debate, it's a lot to talk about. But Connor Gallagher did a similar thing where he's not quite a number 10 because he can receive on the turn, but he's not Phil Foden. He's not especially creative is his main issue because he can score goals. He's not a number 6, even though he has huge tackles and interception numbers. He's also crazy and, he'll leave huge gaps behind him and you don't want him receiving off the first line, which is what Thomas Tuchel had him doing and what got him a red card on his second game. So the answer is kind of a box-to-box, but the problem is that a typical box-to-box doesn't really exist anymore. It doesn't really. There's obviously in certain teams it does, and I don't really know how Atletico play, but if I had to wager on one team having a box-to-box, Atletico have more of a box-to-box than City do. A box-to-box for City is a player in the pockets who gets up and down, and that's not quite him. He's a box-to-box who is allowed to kind of do what Kante did. I understand why he said that, to go and do your tackles and interceptions, but have someone behind you to still give you a bit of support when you go a bit crazy. And the difference he has to Kante is even though he's not a number 10, he has a lot of quality shooting in and around the box. And has he scored 2 goals for Atletico already, or was it 1?
2 goals. So, as I said, one of the best players of Atleti this season. Cholo loved him. Cholo always loved him, by the way. I think he already mentioned him like 2 years ago. And what you said, Felix, about N'Golo Kante, I am always here to help you. So my player roles, in my opinion, N'Golo Kante was one of the main reasons because I was thinking, is he is he a holding midfielder or is he a box-to-box midfielder? So let's say that N'Golo Kante is a modern holding midfielder. So a mix of a defensive midfielder and a box-to-box midfielder. And I think this defines him the best.
We're going to take a little halftime break, and when we come back, we're going to the present. We just went for the past, all the Cobham graduates, and now we're going to some of the rising stars who can have a defining moment in Chelsea and in European football for the foreseeable future. Okay, that wraps up the first half. For the second half, we're going deep into the current crop of talent in the academy with 7 players that we've hand-selected for Felix to not only grade, but also to speak a bit about where he sees their potential and where he sees them potentially playing a role in this Chelsea first team. Felix, starting now with you. We have 7 players, so which of them would you say is the least potential of this really talented crop?
If I had to rank this list on pure talent, so firstly, you've got a very good 7. I'll give you that. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Genesis Antwi is probably the most interesting one that you have on the list, and well, not that you need me to say, but good identification of Genesis Antwi because he's not not everyone will know him too well. He's been in the under 18s. So pure talent wise, I will probably go Genesis Antwi last, and this really kills me. It's like ranking Saka, Palmer, and Foden. It's like, oh, whoever's third you hate. I love Genesis Antwi. I do. The thing is, he's a second-year scholar. I don't know how much people are used to English terminology for development. We do it by school years. So a first-year scholar would ideally play for the under 18s. Second-year scholar ideally plays for the under 21s. That is your perfect, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but that's your perfect development plan. That's what Levi Colwill did. He then went on loan for his 18 to 19 age group, then Brighton 19 to 20, and then Chelsea. So that's perfect. You don't need to do that though. Recently, we haven't done that. So our under 21s is made up fully of people part in the 18 to 19 age group, where I would say ideally you'd be on loan. But just because Chelsea had a backlog of talent, they played their under-18 season as second-year scholars, even though ideally they play under-21. So it's not the biggest thing in the world, but he's a second-year scholar and he's still playing under-18s football. I'll also say he's had a couple injury issues, so there's something to add in there as a particular thing. He has such an interesting profile because you talked about physical players at Cobham. He is the definition of that. He is one of the most robust physical players I've ever seen in youth football. He's naturally a right back, but he's played, I'd say, maybe even more at left back. And he will pick up the ball and do these incisive dribbles right through the center of the pitch. He uses his arms to such great effect, pushing players off, incredibly long legs, powerful strides, just plays through players. The reason I have him at bottom is it's an extremely talented list, but I'd say that he's a very specific profile. Okay. He doesn't typically go around the outside and cross the ball. He obviously can, but he's such a strong dribbler that he often goes down the inside. He's technically gifted with his dribbles, but maybe he's not like, going to be maneuvering in and out of tight spaces, inverting into midfield. So I'm just interested to see how he fits into a system. In terms of translating to senior football physically, I'd put him near the top of this list. It's a very tough list, so I feel bad, but I'd put Genesis Antwi last.
This is what's wrong with this list. That if you put him as a last, people will think that you don't rate him. So it's not that. I also have Antwi as the seventh, so the last one, but I rate him really high. I mostly watch him for Sweden under 17s, and I really feel that he's better on the left than on the right. You rarely see a fullback that enters the penalty area so often. Like he was playing higher than the wingers, and this Swedish generation is really interesting. For example, Kusia Sar from Bayern or Neo Jonsson that Adam watched recently, and he loved the player from Copenhagen. And I would say Antwi was top three players of this Swedish generation. So really nice player, incredible physicality and speed. So I would be surprised if he wouldn't even make it like in the championship. He has even the EPL level, Premier League level, but I would be surprised if he'll end up lower than the championship because even the physical profile is amazing, right?
I can only echo what Jacek and Felix said, and like them, I also think it's a player you would say is better on the left side because he has that real physical edge and that upper body strength to go into central channels and not be pushed off. I mean, you look at a player like, let's say Aina, for example. If you played him on the opposite side, you had him inverting a lot, you'd have some difficulties with basically going up against those strong DMs who can then put in a physical challenge and maybe push him off, at least especially in his early development years. Versus with Antwi, I don't necessarily have those troubles, and I think that in central channels he can hold zone more.
Shall I go for my next player?
Go for it.
Yeah. Next, I'll go, and I'm comfortable with this one, and it's a player I've spoken about with Jacek before, is Ollie Harrison. I'll go with Ollie Harrison, number 6. There's 7, right? Yeah, number 6. Reason is, again, extremely talented player. He will transition to the senior game well because he's already very tall. I'd say maybe 6'1", maybe 6'2". I don't know. He's very tall. He's physically strong, and he's extremely technical. He can pick up the ball from the back line. He's incredible, like disguised pass about him. He can he'll stand there and he'll do I don't want to use the word, but like a Trivela pass, like right round the corner of a player. He'll play it so well. He'll thread the needle. He's really, really good. My only issue with Ollie Harrison, and I said this to Jacek when he brought him up, is I don't think he does enough, and I think he needs to learn a lesson. He clearly was a very good player at Newcastle. We signed him from Newcastle at his scholarship year, and he plays like a luxury player. And even though he is a very good player and his quality is that of a luxury player, he needs to put himself about more. He needs to get more involved. He needs to get more involved defensively, but also get more involved in picking up the ball. Too often he'll just drop in between the centre backs and be happy to get the ball there and try and compose the whole team. He needs to be way more active. And a player we're going to talk about later is the definition of that. Getting involved in not just getting the ball off the back line, getting involved in all areas of the pitch. Ollie Harrison is incredibly creative with the ball, but he can do more. So I think in a couple of years, you could almost look at this. Okay, I won't look silly because this is top 7 of Cobham, right? They're all very good, but you could say, oh, you put Ollie Harrison 6th. Maybe he should have been 2nd. But he needs to make that leap. He really does. He needs to put himself about more. But yeah, Ollie Harrison, I love him. He's a incredibly technical, a really unique profile in academy football, in that he's already physically there. A lot of defensive midfielders, people talk about, you either create a Declan Rice, or I suppose you create, I don't know, a Billy Gilmour. I know he's not English, but he's a good balance between the two. He has a lot of technical qualities about him. I just want to see him make that next step.
Totally agree. I also, in my notes, I have simple, efficient, often progressive. These are kind of the exact same themes you were mentioning here. And that's really, really good when you're a player who's playing every single match, right? You're just getting numbers and numbers of minutes where people have a big data set to watch you. But then when we're talking about that transition to the first team, when you maybe come in for 20 minutes at the end of a fixture, or you get 40 minutes in a preseason tour where you need to impress, that's where, like you say, Ollie Harrison doesn't have deficits, but he'll have some difficulties because he's really a shielding DM who likes to hold in front of the back line and only really shows his quality through volume rather than individual actions. I think the one thing that you also said right at the beginning, though, those little Travella passes, for me, it's the disguise on his passes. You really, if you pause the match right before he passes the ball and you say, where does the ball go? At least 50% of the time, you'll have no idea, because he really has that Sergio Busquets, Thiago Alcantara, no look pass that's, so impactful.
I agree. I didn't watch him that much, but every time I watched him, he was at least solid. So a really interesting mix of technical and physical skills. So once again, I would also put him on the same place, so sixth place. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the top six club in the future, honestly. So one more guy with huge potential, but yeah, I rate other guys slightly more, and I still want to see something more from him, something that will make me say, "Wow."
Okay, and then Felix, for your number 5 pick.
Okay, I know I've complained with every single pick, but this is my line. I genuinely hate this now, because this top five, the other two are extremely good players, but I quickly was like, they're bottom two. I cannot pick between these five. I will try my best, but I would literally go like right neck and neck with each other. I think these are really exceptional talents, and with my placements, I'm going to find excuses to put them there, which I think you'll see with my next one. You ask most people, I think they would go either Ishe Samuels-Smith or Tyrique George. I'm going to go for Kiano Dyer, and it pains me so much to say that, because he is potentially my like poster boy when I say, look at Cobham, this guy, like he's the definition. And there's a funny story. I took my girlfriend to an academy game. Okay, I managed to drag her all the way to an academy game at Kingsmeadow to watch Chelsea versus Fulham. We lost 4-0 in the pouring rain. But the one player that I was like, watch out for him, and she told me after the game how good he was Kiano Dyer. Okay, so he shouldn't be here, but I'm putting him here because it's easier to put him here, because there's an easy explanation for why he should be there, and it's his build. Firstly, let's talk about his positives. Insane talent. Absolutely insane. His technical ability is a joke. He can receive the ball at literally every single angle, fizz it into him, he'll receive it. He scans so well. His balance is a joke. He's so nimble. He'll get the ball and he'll spin around a player like he's Eden Hazard. Such a low center of gravity. Very good passer as well. Talk about disguised passes. He has it as well. Maybe not so much the Travella, but he has these like no-look passes, quick jinks inside that he does. Another thing, he gets himself around. He impacts the game in all phases. I posted a clip on my Twitter around a week and a half ago. I think it was Chelsea's last under-21s game. I forgot who it was against, but I posted a 1 minute and 50-second clip, which I usually don't do. I usually just post the goals because people on Twitter don't care that much. But I posted it because you saw Kiano Dyer affecting the game from back to front. He picked up the ball from the defensive line. He brought it all the way up. He played a disguised pass. He got into the box. He recovered the ball and he went again. He's so clever. The reason why I have him here, and I'm going to contradict myself when I say it, is because he's tiny. People kind of overdo how small he is height-wise. He's not actually that small height-wise. If I had to guess, he'd be like 175 centimeters. It's not impossible to break through into the men's game with that. But not just that. He's extremely slender. He's extremely bony. He's very lanky. And this aids his game. We talked about putting on muscle mass. It's what makes him so nimble. But you just wonder, when he comes into the senior game, is he just going to get bullied? And before I pass it on, I'm going to contradict myself here, because I will listen to every argument that says he won't, because this guy has played one age group up, two age groups up, his whole career. I mean, the first time I knew Kiano Dyer, Chelsea Youth is my main account for Chelsea News. If you want to follow Cobham, follow Chelsea Youth. He gives you all the updates. Kiano Dyer made his under-18s debut 2 years in advance. At the end of the season, I think it was the 21-22 season, he came off the bench and he scored a goal. That's when I first heard about him. He then played the full under-18 season as an under-16, playing a year up. And then last season, he played the full under-21 season as a first-year scholar. Okay, that is absolutely unbelievable. That is even like a month or two earlier than Lewis Hall. Always played up. He's always matched up against people bigger than him. And the last piece of evidence is very recent, is in the EFL Trophy. If people don't know what the EFL Trophy is, it's academy teams playing against League One and League Two opposition. It's a very good competition to see how they fare physically. And we played Bromley recently. Funnily enough, I didn't watch the game because it was at the same time as a Chelsea men's game. So I watched the Chelsea game. But I listened to a Bromley fans match report. I listened to Chelsea Youth match report, and I listened to the Bromley manager as well, talking about the Chelsea team. And apparently he was the best player on the pitch. He was absolutely the best player on the pitch. And that is against actual men. So Kiano Dyer has done everything to show to everyone that he will not have a problem and that he has his whole career been adjusting to people being twice the size of him. But unfortunately, I need an excuse in this list, and he's the easiest one to say, I can see why it wouldn't quite work in the men's game. So there's my monologue over.
Yeah, so for me, Kiano is a definition of a roaming playmaker. So a guy who orchestrates the play not only with his passing, but also with his ball carries. He's a fantastic ball carrier, technically brilliant, close ball control, superb. I would say he's one of these guys that when you watch a game, and even if he has a bad game, he has this one touch and one ball carry that you say, wow, who on earth is this guy? I want to know who this guy is, and I go to Google and check him out. So, brilliant player. I would say he would make my top three still, but yeah, really lightweight player. I would compare him to guys like with Vitinha, Marco Verratti, Frankie de Jong. And I would say what could do him good is the transfer to a Bundesliga club, for example, or even Eredivisie club. So not so much physical leagues, but yeah, I'm a football romantic, guys. So I really love this technical geniuses, and for me, Keanu, he's a pure joy to watch.
I'm totally with both of you. Roaming playmaker 100%. When I initially watched him, I also said Vitinha right away. But just from hearing from Felix also, I think for me, even kind of a career path like Angel Gomez is where I really see him bursting into light. I think he's not someone who necessarily will be able to immediately adapt to English football, but going to a foreign league, going to Lille initially in Angel Gomez's case, and then going out on loan to Boa Vista in Portugal is precisely the moves that would really do a player like him well. Going into really technical leagues where there's a lot of possession-based football, that's something where I can see him really, really developing best, getting first team minutes under his belt, and then kind of dispelling the myth almost that he isn't robust enough for physical senior football, and then returning to English football.
There is such an interesting debate, and like I want to like test my knowledge by seeing in a couple of years where he is. But like I was talking to Alex, I keep mentioning him, sorry, but I was talking to him about Kiano Dyer, and he was like, "There's no reason why you shouldn't make it. Look at Billy Gilmour," and we've spoken about Billy Gilmour today. I think Billy Gilmour could have done more, but you can't pretend like he hasn't made it. He's played at really, really top clubs, and Kiano Dyer is very similar in terms of midfielder coming in with a much lighter build, and Billy Gilmour did it. But then you have players like Lewis Bate and Charlie Webster, who are two players that were recently in the academy. Not the exact same type of players. And I'd say Charlie Webster especially is more physically robust than Kiano Dyer. He's small, but he's quite stocky. Lewis Bate is playing for Stockport in League One. I won't talk about him too much. He gets disrespected quite a lot by Chelsea fans because they were very sad that he left along with Tino Livramento, and I was very sad too. And then they say, well, he's playing for Stockport. Stockport is in League One as a 20-year-old is still impressive, and he's making his way up. And can I just say, he got named the captain a month after joining, okay, as a 20-year-old, which is ridiculous. And Charlie Webster went on loan to Heerenveen last season in the Dutch division, did what you just suggested, going to a slightly lower league, more technical, showcase yourself, and it didn't work out. He hardly played, and now he's at Burton Albion in League One, actually under our ex-under-21s manager who managed Charlie. You can look at those players and say, Billy Gilmour showed it could work. The other two showed it couldn't. So there's two ways that a career can go, even with the same build. It's always hard to project. The second, to give players time. I think even the players, you can come up with examples that aren't going to work. Environment is really, really important. And you ask any Leeds fan about Lewis Bate, they will say that he got really mistreated and he should have been used more. And sometimes it happens.
There is no one way to the top. There are many ways to the top. Like I really loved what Adam said about Angel Gomez. It was a way around to the top, but he's still a senior English international. We can't all be like Lamine Yamal, so wonder kid since you are 16 and then going to the top. I really hope that Kiano will take the way around like Angel Gomez, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him even in the senior national team in a few years. But as I said, I think he should leave England. It would be a good step to leave England and go, France, Netherlands, or Bundesliga.
Yeah, and I think this whole debate about different routes to the top is such a pertinent topic in English football specifically, because I think until 10 years ago it was, if you're not right away good enough for the Premier League, then you go to the Championship, then you go to League One, then you go to League Two. But now there's so many different exit doors and different avenues that are also open to English footballers because others have paved the way, that this is becoming more of a reality, and it's such a good thing because you're losing way fewer players out of the game. I mean, let's look at Angel Gomez again. I don't want to harp on it too long, but 10 years ago, that player would never be anywhere near the English national team right now. He would be playing championship football because he wouldn't have gotten a route into the Premier League and would have had to work his way up probably from a club like Luton Town or a club like Burton Albion, one of these small clubs in the lower regions of English football. And there, the physicality would have immediately eaten him alive. But going for a different pathway is kind of what saved his career, I think, and is now seeing him prove everyone wrong that he is good enough for top level football. Felix, let's move on now to your fourth place pick.
You're really killing me with this one because I'm so torn. And this is a player that when I looked through this as before we started, I wanted to put him higher. And I wanted to put him higher because I see him higher. And I think he's really, really underrated. But interestingly, maybe not by you guys. I'd be interested to hear what your opinion is. I mean by Chelsea, he's underrated. So I want to put him higher. I'm going to put him here. Ishe Samuels-Smith. And my excuse for it is because he is underrated by Chelsea, so he's not getting pushed to the level I think he should be. I think he should be being used like Josh Acheampong and like Tyrique George, being brought into the first team for minutes. He's not even in training. He trained for the first time this season with the first team during the international break, but he's not been training with the first team, and it's really annoying me. And I love him. I love him because, firstly, he is prototypical modern game left back becoming a left centre back. If I could recommend like a player to a club for that sort of profile, Ishe Samuels-Smith would be so high up there. So high up there. I think he's incredible. His 1v1 defending is exceptional. It is absolutely exceptional. I rarely see players get past him. He has very long legs. And what's good about him, he's played as a centre back mostly while coming through, to my knowledge. And when he initially came to Chelsea, I was getting annoyed seeing him at left back because I thought he's better as a centre back. But now we're playing a bit more of a modern style. He now does that left back coming into centre back for our under 21s. And what's incredible about him is he's, I suppose, a bit like, he's not similar to this player, but in terms of he's a left back inverting into centre back. But like Calafiori, he impacts the game going forwards. If you saw him at left back in certain games, you will think he's a bombing on left back because he can receive the ball in any zone. He can receive it in the half space. He can receive it out wide. He combines with the winger, often Tyrique George, so much. He underlaps, he overlaps. He's got, I think, 4 assists already for the under-21s this season, playing as a left centre-back at times in a back five. And he still gets forwards. That's how technical he is. I don't see what else you'd really want in that position from a player. He has literally everything for me. He has the passing range, he has the carrying ability, and he has a defensive ability. And I think he's 6'2" as well. So I want to put Ishe Samuels-Smith higher. I think he'll translate excellently to the modern game. I want him already involved with Chelsea's first team, but my excuse again for putting him lower is that Chelsea, for some reason, are not involving him as much as Josh Acheampong, who for me is a very similar player doing a very similar thing on the other side of the pitch.
I really like Samuel-Smith. When I watched England under 17s for the first time, well, that generation, I always do something like, yeah, when I watch a new team, I always try to put my top three, the talents that I will try to follow in the next weeks. And yes, Samuel-Smith made it to the top three, and yeah, Josh Acheampong didn't. So yeah, a great profile. I see a little bit of Alaba in him, so really good in every position. I could even say that he would be good as a defensive midfielder. His ball skills are really great. So yeah, what's not to like? So for me, a great talent. I know that Adam doesn't rate him that much, but in my opinion, definitely a Premier League level potential.
Yeah, what's not rating that much? I mean, we have such a high quality list here. I think that's kind of what Felix has mentioned as well. It's so hard to kind of put one at 7 and put one at 2 when there's so little between them sometimes. The thing that I want to touch on briefly is the price tag for which he came to Chelsea. £5 million, I believe it was, or around that, last summer from Everton. It's a crazy fee for someone who covers German football when we're talking about youth academy players moving for those sums when about half the Bundesliga can't even pay 5 million for a player in a normal top quality summer window. Do you think that fee impacts what his potential should look like? And specifically, when you mentioned also that he's not even involved in first team training, that's also quite baffling when you consider how much Chelsea have invested into him.
There's a couple things here. I don't want to dispute what you said, but I've never seen the 5 million figure for Ishe. When he was signed by Chelsea, Fabrizio didn't mention a figure, and I didn't see anyone else mentioning a figure. So the thing is with these youth football transfers, same with Carney Chukwuemeka, no one really knows like how much we paid for him. Amari Hutchinson is the better example from Arsenal. Was it a free transfer, training compensation packages? I don't know. We did sign him while he was under contract at Everton 100% because I think he signed a scholarship and we signed him after his first year as a scholar. So we would have paid a fee, but I would be shocked if it was 5 million. I could be wrong, but I never thought of him as a 5 million player. Another thing I'll say is I understand what you're saying about he's not even training with the first team, but this is what confuses me because last season he was training with the first team all the time and he was involved in match day squads all the time. He was always on the bench. Him, Josh Acheampong, Tyrique George, and Kiano Dyer. Those were the main ones, especially Ishe and Josh were in squads a lot of the time. So this is the thing. You can say he's not involved this season, but he was involved last season. I just don't understand why he's not. Maybe it's purely because we have Mark Cucurella and we have Renato Vega, and neither of them have gotten any injuries this season, so there's just no need. It could be as simple as that. But equally, I'll say, you're right when you compare it to what you know. What I know is Chelsea Football Club, and they're spending insane amounts of money on certain players. I think 5 million for Ishe Samuels-Smith compared to some of the players we're signing is a fair price to pay, genuinely. And we'll get on to another player that I have at the top of my list here, who, if he was Brazilian, I would be dropping 50 million on him right now by Chelsea standards, right? Obviously not by normal standards, but by Chelsea standards. So yeah, I think he's really good. I understand your concerns, but I'm not sure about the figure. And he was involved last season. I just assuming it's a pecking order kind of thing.
Yeah, I just my small Bundesliga brain can't wrap around it. In Germany, it's like if you go into 7 figures, it's already an outcry about how this player needs to hit double digits goals and assists to even pay back that price tag.
My next one is, again, pains me to the absolute hills, but I'm going to go Tyrique George. I love Tyrique George. I love him so much. I think he's an exceptional player, and he's made a couple first team appearances and been so impressive. My least favorite thing, or at least, I mean, it's understandable. My least favorite thing is when an academy player comes to the first team and they don't do what they do for the academy. And I'm not saying that because of the level. I'm saying they're just scared to do it. And prime examples, I suppose, on the side of doing it is Lewis Hall. Lewis Hall, I was raving about him. He got his chance against Chesterfield as a left centre back, which is not a position he usually plays, and he went for it. And he was dribbling the whole pitch just like he always does. But certain academy players will come on and they won't show themselves. They won't show what they do. And Tyrique George has come on and he has not been scared. Even when he's been put at right wing, he will take on his fullback. He'll do the most unnecessary chops backwards that he doesn't need to do, but it works and it's his game, and I'm happy he does it. I've got him on this list at third, which, to be fair, is incredibly high, so I don't think I need to explain why he's lower. But the reason why he's not first or second is because of what I mentioned with my Ishe answer, which is I feel like he's slightly hamstrung. I know we're talking about these talents generally, but because I'm a Chelsea fan, I think about how they'll do at Chelsea, which is silly because none of them make it through. But looking at him for Chelsea, it pains me to see him as a touchline winger or a half space inside player because he's neither. He shouldn't be either. If you have to pick one, he's probably a touchline winger of the ilk of Jadon Sancho, a player who's controlled, coordinated, not a Mykhailo Mudryk. I tweeted this out when Tyrique George came on against Servette, and I got killed by Chelsea fans. I said, it's so funny how much more coordinated Tyrique George is than Mykhailo Mudryk. And I will stand by that until the cows come home because he's incredibly, incredibly controlled of what he does. He knows what he's doing before he receives the ball. His ball control is incredible. And he's of the ilk of Jadon Sancho, as I said, where he does take on players, but he's not going to be a Savinho, like a Savio or whatever, like taking on players full speed, Jeremy Doku. He's more controlled about it, which I think has its place. But it's a bit annoying to see him hamstrung, and I think he does really well in central areas. And what do you see in central areas is the first thing you should mention when you talk about Tyrique George is his ball striking. Best ball striker at the club. First team, academy, best ball striker at the club. Both feet, absolute wallops. Okay, absolute wallops. Stepping up to the under-21s last season, didn't phase him at all. Incredible. Absolutely incredible ball striker. The only one that goes up against him is Dushwan Richards. Whisper is an incredible ball striker as well. And let me finish my sentence here. Mykhailo Mudryk in training. Mykhailo Mudryk in training, his ball striking is otherworldly. On the pitch, it's broken my window all the way over here in Italy. Okay, so there's a difference there. But yeah, I love Tyrique George, and I think he's done very well moving over to the first team. He also transitions very well because he's very tall. I'd say maybe 6'1". He's got a slender figure, but he's not weak. He's very strong. He uses his arms very well, and he's an excellent combination player as well. He really links up well with the fullback. So I love him. I want him to make it through. But yeah, I feel like maybe he'll be slightly hamstrung by being a winger. And also, winger is always a hard position to break into because you have all your luxury 60 million signings on the wing. So yeah, I'll go with Tyrique George.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mudryk. I would say that if you take off speed from Mudryk, there is nothing left. And when you take off speed from Tyrique George, there is still a lot of things to like. So I really like his versatility, as you said, the ball striking. I also saw him playing as an attacking midfielder, and he did really well there. I don't really see him breaking through to the first team of Chelsea, but I see him making a really good career. He should maybe move to a championship club, and I'm quite sure that his numbers would explode like within a year. In a year, he would be one of the best wingers in the championship. So I really see him reaching the top, but not through Chelsea.
I can only echo what Jacek and Felix both said. The confidence and the technique from long range on both feet is really exceptional. It's something that makes him stand out so much. A defender really can't bring him into one direction. You can't force him down the line because he has qualities that way. You can't force him inside because he has qualities that way. It makes him such a special talent and something that is still not really that often seen, even at the top level of football.
Yeah, I have to say, just quickly, Jacek, you make me sad just saying that he's not going to make it at Chelsea because I'm currently in my emotional stage because all these players we're talking about, they're ready and they could break through. And you saying that he probably won't, or I don't want him to make it through at Chelsea, you're right. But it just makes me sad to think about it because they're there now. And what I will say is I agree with you, but he has a chance. He really does have a chance. And the reason is because the secondary left winger is Mykhailo Mudryk. Not only is he not performing, and I know he's got a price tag, but Maresca has shown he's not scared to leave Mudryk out. It's quite funny. In press conferences, they say, do you think it's a lack of confidence for Misha? And he's like, no, it's just Misha. That's just, there's no confidence. That's just who he is. He's ready to play Tyrique George. Played him against Servette, which sounds like a game to play Tyrique George. There was actually a moment where we were only up on aggregate by 1 goal, and he brought him on with 30 minutes to go. So he was using him in a high pressure situation. Tyrique George will not go on loan this season because, as I explained earlier, him and his whole age group, they played under 18s football. So now is his age group to play under 21s football, and next year he'd ideally go on loan. But because of that, he's here, he's senior, physically ready, and he's training with the first team every single day. So as much as I agree that in reality he probably won't, there's a difference between him and most other Chelsea talents in that the opportunity might actually be there.
Doesn't it remind you a bit of Callum Hudson-Odoi, of the younger version of Callum Hudson-Odoi? Of course, right now we see Callum as a more of a pure winger, But as I said before, Callum was playing also centrally. So would you compare slightly Tyrique to young version of Callum?
I would slightly. The one thing that I always have as a distinction between them is explosiveness. Hudson-Odoi, for me, was a lot more explosive than Tyrique George was. And it's not an issue, it's just a profile of winger. Hudson-Odoi on that wing had pure pace, especially before the Achilles. He had that pure pace. He had the coordination as well. He had the back post cross, but he had explosiveness, and it's what allowed him to play on the right just as much as the left. When you see Tyrique George come on at the right wing, he's a cultured winger who's going to find passes and make little jinks, but he's not going to take on the fullback on the outside and destroy him. Hudson-Odoi on the right wing was happy to do that. He'd take on the man, and he was very direct. He always had his signature move. He'd do a ball roll over the ball instead of to the side. He'd do it over the ball, 2-step overs, bam, go around the outside. Tyrique George is a bit more slow, methodical, and doesn't quite have that explosiveness that Hudson-Odoi had for me.
Yeah, 100%. I think the methodical element you mentioned there also is why we're so confident that he also can have a long-term future at attacking midfield. He's not purely built around kind of open space 1v1s, driving with pace down the wings. Not that that's bad, but it's just kind of not his thing. He has so much more to his game, and I think that's what makes him such a unique talent. Okay, on to our final two, Felix. Does it get easier or does it get harder now that we're going to the very end?
Honestly, I'd say it gets slightly easier. It's still hard to pick between the two. And this is the part where I can so easily give an answer because there's talent and there's readiness for senior football. And there's quite an easy distinction to be made here. You know, do you take a gamble or you don't? The past ones were harder because honestly, those five, Kiano Dyer, Ishe Samuels-Smith, Josh Acheampong, Tyrique George, and Shim Mheuka, like they are so close. So it was a bit harder before. My number two is Josh Acheampong, and I'm betting on Shim Mheuka. Josh Acheampong is exceptional. He has absolutely everything you'd want. He's a right back who, when he plays as a traditional right back, will bomb on. He'll do overlaps, although it's not actually the biggest part of his game. He'll do overlaps, but his signature move is that incisive dribble. He'll pick up the ball and just turn and dribble straight through the middle, and it'll cut through your whole team. And when we talk about academy players coming to senior football, every single time I do a live stream before a Chelsea game, if Josh Acheampong is on the bench and maybe potentially ready to play, I tell everyone, I promise you, you've not seen 100% of Josh Acheampong if he doesn't do his dribble through the middle of the pitch. That means he's scared. That means he's not showing his full capabilities, in my opinion, because that's what he does when he's at full pelt. His technique on 1v1s is astounding, and then he has the height and the long legs to be able to recover and make big sliding tackles. He has everything. And then we talk about his height, we talk about his 1v1 ability. He fits the exact mold of a right back coming into right centre back if you want to invert the right back into defensive position. The one thing I think he can do slightly even better if you see him molding into that position is his passing. His passing is good, but it's not obviously a Levi Colwill. It's not going to, absolutely break lines, but it's even not an Ishe Samuels-Smith. It's not quite an Ishe Samuels-Smith who has played more purely as a centre-back. Josh has played as a centre-back, but mostly as a filling-in job. He played against Everton under-18s at the last season. He's played for England in the last couple of internationals next to Harrison Murray-Campbell. So he has played as a centre-back, but Ishe is more used to playing purely as a centre-back, and his passing is a bit more on it for me. But that doesn't matter that much because look at Antonio Rudiger. I wouldn't say Josh Acheampong is that far off Antonio Rudiger in terms of just purely as passing wise. And you look at Antonio Rudiger under Thomas Tuchel, I see a very similar profile. A guy who gets the ball, is very aggressive, sees space in front of him, takes it on and goes. Very physical, impossible to beat 1v1.
Yeah, that's very true. Such a complete profile. If you'd put Josh in a solid championship side, he would start every game and he would be a standout player. I have zero doubts about it. It's true what you said about Ishe Samuel-Smith being more elegant on the ball. That's true, but yeah, Josh can play as a right-sided center back in a three-man line as a right back. So incredibly complete profile. Next season, it needs to be a loan to a solid championship side.
For me, it's like if God created a defender, you would literally just have Josh Acheampong fall out of the sky. I mean, literally exactly the physical attributes you would want. There's nothing that you can really desire more in that respect. And for me, it's important that he gets that loan, but it's also important that he stays in English football because he has the physical attributes to directly develop in the English senior game. And like I said, the championship is such a good next step for him. It's exactly where he needs to be, playing so many games in the year, and then a good spell there will see him easily adapt into a more prominent role in this Chelsea squad.
And I'll also say quickly, underrated is his goal scoring. He gets a lot of headers. He gets to the back post, and it's not surprising because of his height, but he does get into the box. And Jacek, it's a very interesting conversation what you said about Alone, and Adam as well, because I agreed with you initially, but there is a debate to be had, and I'm interested to see what Chelsea do, because Chelsea have always been a club that puts a lot of players on loan. That's how we've operated. I know that best by literally having an account that followed loan players for 2.5 years. But now we have a manager who's coming with a very specific style of play. We've heard reports that they've want to copy City a bit, and I've seen Manchester City not necessarily put all their talents out on loan and be ready for the first team. But I'm interested to see what happens with these players, because Enzo Maresca in a press conference was asked about these academy players, Tyrique George and Josh Acheampong, and he said, yes, I love them, whatever. But he also said, I like to mold these players. They're very impressionable at a young age, firstly personality-wise, but also I want to mold them into my type of player. So when you said a win-to-loan move, it's not typical, obviously. We don't often do it. But to be honest, you're right. Is there much point in wasting Josh Acheampong in under-21s football? Not really. He's ready. But we also spoke about him being a right back coming into a right centre back and talked about his passing maybe coming in more into play. If Maresca feels like, no, let's keep him around, I want to mould him, maybe there's a case to be made that him and maybe even Tyrique George, we talked about touchline winger, pocket player, that maybe that's an arc we're going to see at Chelsea soon, that these top academy players maybe won't go on loan at all or initially, and they're going to be moulded by Maresca. And Josh is a player that I would understand very much if Maresca wanted to keep him and mold him, because I think there is a molding to be done there.
Yeah, I think a big element here is also the fact that, of course, me and Jacek don't have the Chelsea glasses on. So for Felix, it's so advantageous to also have Josh in the squad when you're playing in free competitions with a conference league where you're likely going to go quite far, or 4 competitions, because it's obviously English with 2 cups. There's so many opportunities for games time still with
and
him
Reece
staying
James in the hospital as well.
Yeah, and that, of course, as well. So game time is always available. But if you're saying from a purely player development standpoint, maybe that loan is more advantageous. So there, it's really about how can Chelsea strike that perfect balance between doing what's best for the club in the short term and also doing what's best for Josh in the long term. Okay, we have one player left.
Yeah, we do. Okay. Who's my number one? My number one is Shim or Mheuka, which is how you pronounce his name, apparently. I've gone through many different ways, but I think he's confirmed himself. It's not Mheuka, it's Mheuka. Yeah, as I said, I've taken a bit more of a gamble here. Shim is 16. I believe he turns 17 in a week. He's a first-year scholar, and he's already playing under-21s football. He is an incredible talent. I'm gambling a bit more, but to be fair, what do you usually gamble on with a younger player? Obviously injuries, but we forget about that. Physical. And to be fair to Shim, physically, he's really up there. I'd say he's probably like 6 foot, maybe 5'11". Not the tallest person in the world, but tall enough. But he's very, very robust, very strong upper body. He doesn't get bullied. He really doesn't. Incredibly low center of gravity as well. If he gets pushed over, he stays on his feet. Last season, as an under-16, he played for the under-18s for the whole season. Unfortunately, he got an injury and was out for about 4 or 5 months around the winter period, so he didn't necessarily play every single game. But he came straight into the under-18s, scored goals. This season, okay, Chelsea have Donnell McNeely, who I think is an extremely underrated talent, David Washington, for God knows what reason, still in the under-21s, Jimmy J. Morgan, all waiting to play under-21s football. And a credit to our manager, Philippe Coelho, and Joe Shields, who's been running the academy since Neil Bath left, that they have stopped giving people opportunities purely based off a price tag, based off what's financially correct. David Washington came in for £15 million. Jimmy J. Morgan, he came in for £5 million. And he's been playing over them. He's been starting under-21s games. And it's not just about scoring goals. He physically bullying under-21 players. He is a winger up top when he's on the ball. He's so good on the ball. Back to goal, incredible with his physicality, can turn so easily, can use both feet, so strong on the dribble. he genuinely has everything you'd want in a striker while being incredibly physical as well at his age, and has always played up. Mentality as well, from what we know from interviews, exceptional. I know I saw it in the notes, not to reveal too much, but that goal against Spain, unreal. The close control, the ability to turn so quickly, and the finishing, it's unreal. I love Shim Mheuka. I think he's incredible. I think Chelsea need to grow up. Okay, like there are some talents you can't. Like you can't mess this up. I love Tyrique George, but if Tyrique George goes somewhere else, sure. But if you dare not to give Shim Mheuka at least a chance in the first team, right? If he continues to perform, I will be so angry, especially in a position that is the most sought after position in the world. Give him a chance. He's right there. He deserves it.
I very often say this anecdote about Pablo Aimar while being asked to describe the style of play of Javier Saviola. He said, big explosion. I think that could describe Shim's style of play. So, physical, athletic, speed, technique, aggression, mobility. This guy is a true nightmare for defenders. I'm sure that whenever there is a center back, seeing Shim Mheuka in front of him, he says, I'm going to have a bad day. I really hope he will get his chance at Chelsea. And as you said, yeah, you also have Jimmy J. Morgan, David Washington. It's a crazy amount of talent, but yeah, Shim Mheuka is just the number one.
Yeah, he's really an everything player. Like both Jacek and Felix said, I mean, he has the pace, the power, the scoring prowess of a number 9, and then also the technical manipulations, the tight space ability of an attacking midfielder. Like Felix said as well, that goal against Spain at the U17 World Cup, or excuse me, U17 Euros, I would even go as far as to say my favorite goal in youth football in 2023. It's such a beautiful goal to watch. You just want to watch it over and over again. The turn, the clean strike. I think the ball doesn't divert its path even for a second. It's such a beautiful goal.
Yeah, and maybe he's not the tallest, but I think the only room for improvement would be in the air. He can improve in that aspect. Felix, you saw him more than me, so maybe he scored some great headers, but I didn't see it.
I don't know what the two games are, but there were two recent games for the under 21 that weren't televised, and I watched the highlights of it after, and he actually got two headers in really good positions. So that would say maybe he doesn't, but he missed them, and they were pretty good chances that maybe you'd say at least one of them you should score. So, it's hard to say whether he needs to get to more headers or his accuracy needs to improve. But yeah, if you have to be harsh, he could improve in the air. But yeah, I mean, there's not much else to add. I will say he got called up to England under 19s as a 16-year-old. To be fair, it was because someone dropped out with injury, so he was like the first on the waiting list. But still a call up, and he scored on his full debut. Started again, was it Netherlands? I think he scored. Played 65 minutes, scored as a 16-year-old for the England under 19s. He continues to just completely defy expectations, play age groups up, and I mentioned that Bromley game. There was two players, Kiano Dyer and Shim Mheuka, as a 16-year-old against Bromley, I think League Two opposition, incredibly physical. He apparently, I didn't watch the game, obviously, but from people I trust, not just random Twitter people, like apparently he really, really like almost looked above, like genuinely stood out. So yeah, I love him.
Just to finish, I promised myself, Felix, that I will ask you one question at the end of our podcast, and yeah, I just need to do it. So my question is, if you could sign one academy player from England to a Chelsea academy, and this player not being Max Doman and Ethan Nwaneri, who would it be?
Well, I'll be honest. I appreciate the two players you've left out, but I actually thought of this player before you mentioned them. Um, the answer is Mikey Moore for me. I think Mikey Moore is absolutely sensational. His natural ability on the ball is just a joke. It's an absolute joke. And he is playing so many years up because he's also born in August in his year. It's absolutely unreal. I said in October 2023 that we should have dropped 100 million on him instead of Mudryk.
That's a great answer. Probably the best possible answer. Yeah.
I think there's no better way than to end it with the best possible answer. Felix, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Such a comprehensive episode to kick off our club section. People can find you on Twitter, of course, but anything you'd like to plug, feel free to do it right here so people can get some more, Cobham talk and also Chelsea first team talk.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very much. I've genuinely really enjoyed it. Not to, what's the word? Throw smoke up your guys' asses, like praise you guys too much, but I do genuinely really value your guys' opinions. Adam, I'm getting to know you, but especially Jacek, like who I've known just from following his page and on Alex's playback. I really value your opinions. I'm suppose I'm trying to break into the industry myself. So, it's good to see two other people who've prospered there. And it's an honor to come on. It was a really good debate, probably much longer than we expected. And I apologize for any rambles. I really do. But I'm passionate about football, but especially you caught me on my topic, which is Cobham. I love to talk about it. So it was a huge honor to come on, a very huge honor. And in terms of plugging, I mean, not really. I'm not one of those people. Just look up my name, Felix Johnston, and if I have something, it will come up on there. So yeah.
Thanks again for coming on, Felix, and we'll see all the listeners again next week when we take our second country of the Football Talent Show.